like everyone else, I was captivated by the elision of the pandemic in 2020 with the George Floyd case and the Black Lives Matter moment that kicked off, and the repercussions of that, in particular in Britain, around the toppling... Sorry? Toppling the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol and famously going into the harbour, images which went around the world, and seemed to spark a really nasty, particularly nasty bout of the culture wars, with certain statues being targeted for removal and other statues being targeted for protection by right-wing and even far-right protesters patrolling certain statues that was perceived to have been at risk. One of the questions I always ask as an artist is, how can I be useful to my society? How can I make my skills essential to the good functioning of that society? Which is where the idea of applied stories came from. It takes the idea that we can hone our skills in the arts and then take them out into the real world in a way that will have real impact. And I started a conversation in 2020 with a bunch of other people in the theatre industry, and Eleanor actually, at SOAS, who I knew from another project, about exactly this, because around the same time, something called the Festival of the UK was being talked about, which was something that came out of the Brexit negotiations. They threw 120 million quid at a new festival, sort of inspired by the 1950s Festival of Britain. And it was hugely divisive in the arts. It was seen as like tainted money, but at a time of cuts, should we go for it, shouldn't we? And it really split a lot of theatre professionals. Anyway, my idea was to try and disrupt the whole thing by saying, sarcastically, of course, well, let's talk about what Britain's really been good at historically. Let's celebrate our statues. We've been really good at slavery. Let's celebrate our slave traders and have audio pieces, guerrilla art audio pieces, being made by theatre makers and QR codes going up at night on the statues when you can scan it for passers-by. And we would pretend to be the unofficial 11th project of the Festival of the UK. Now that idea quickly died a death, not least because it would involve a lot of theatre people who were already broke, working for no money, and no one could really afford it, not least me. But it actually evolved through that group and continued online and in other physical meetings, evolved into what became a project called New Histories, which actually I think is a much more grown up and sensible way of applying our story-making skills. And what that was we were generously funded by Worldmaking beyond SOAS to test out the idea of designing and involving SOAS students and staff in the designing of a 2-hour community workshop unpacking the history of a statue in that community's area. We're using theatre techniques like a live actor playing that figure in the workshop who the community could actually interact with. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, because the idea was that a professional writer is in each of those workshops and is then tasked with writing a 5-minute audio story, piece, poem, doesn't necessarily have to be a full play, for that community to perform. And so we would upload not just a speech in the voice of the statue, but we would also upload creative community responses, fictionalised, or fictionalised in some cases, but reflecting and conveying not just their views on the statue, but their experiences of the space in which it stands and their sense of ownership on having to be asked to engage with the statue at all. So all of this launched last weekend and sits online, and we'll talk a bit more about its future towards the end. But I hope that serves as a kind of overview. The objects in front of me, in case you're wondering, are the contents of our Gladstone bag. So we chose the statue of William Gladstone, which stands outside Bow Church in East London as our first statue. Turns out he gave his name to a bag. So we spent some of our budget on filling his bag with items from his life, which feel free to browse, maybe at the end. They've all got little luggage labels on, so this is how we unpacked his life in 3 dimensions. And then the pieces became the pieces that you're going to hear.
So to take SOAS students out into the world, give them chances to work with communities around London, around the campus that they're part of, but also give them the chance to share their skills with the community, but also learn from the communities around SOAS. So in February this year, we advertised in the student body for volunteers. We got 22 people, and we selected a group of 12 students who participated in 3 different workshops. 2 ended up being online, but one we had an afternoon here in SOAS, talking through with the students about what they thought about statues, about what they thought about Gladstone, but also getting them to think about facilitation in different and complex community settings. And together we all built, I was completely the one person here who didn't do any of the building. I sat and watched as everybody else built this really participatory, creative but thoughtful workshop that we then took out into Bow. We worked with 3 different community groups. One of them was a group of young people who were just finishing their GCSEs from the area. One was a parents group at a local school, and one was just an open group where anyone could join. I think that was the toughest one, everyone agreed. And 3 of those 12 facilitators, so Shafak, who's here, Zelda, and Joshua, came in, and they helped run those workshops. They were absolutely amazing in getting people talking, sharing ideas, being provocateurs, but also kind of listening and kind of, responding too. So this whole experience really has been one of mutual learning for all of us in the team. I think for the students, we'll hear a little bit more about that towards the end from Shafak. But certainly, I think, from the community too, I've learned a huge amount. So in terms of the kind of cross-community engagements and knowledge sharing that's part of the Worldmaking agenda, I feel we've really kind of done a lot of that in this project. But I'll pass over to Titi. Sorry, Mansi, you're going to go next.
Hi, my name is Mansi, and I met Finn actually when he came on my walking tour. So I do a walking tour around Westminster about the history of the British Empire. It's a very generic title because what I like to talk about is statues in space. A lot of these statues, as Finn mentioned, were the spotlight of a lot of controversy quite recently. We're also living in a post-retain and explain era where it's become illegal to remove a statue, and there's this obligation to retain it and explain it. So I think this is a really subversive way of doing it, and we'll see how we've done it with Applied Stories today. But we're also thinking about these statues having a longer life than the life of the people they actually represent. They've lived there longer, and they've been almost given birth by not the people who gave birth to the actual person, but by people who decided that the statue should be there, the people who decided to pay for that statue, and also the artists who've decided that this is the moment in time that we want to freeze this person. So there are all these considerations around the statue that make it almost like a different character than the person who inspired the statue in itself. And these characters live in this space for a longer time than some communities live in this space. So we were focusing on in Bow, where the community over time has changed, the demographic has changed, and their connection with the statue, this person, or that history has changed as well. So with this particular technique, we kind of unpicked that and in a very real way got the community to communicate with the statue because we actually had the actor in place. So I'm very excited to be a part of this. I'll pass it on to Titi.
Hi. So just to say, there's 3 strands to this. There's statues. We talk about statues. There was a lot of community involvement, and then there's the audio creative piece. So I am all about working with communities, and especially young people. And so we worked with a group of young people. There were 14. A majority of them were, I don't know what's the collective term that we're using nowadays, racially, culturally diverse, whatever, right? And there's so many different collective terms. And and they're 14, mainly 14-year-olds, 13, 14. And what was interesting is that, they're a group of young people who actually, they kind of like this answer here, we don't need statues that celebrate oppressors. So a lot of them are coming from that point of view. A lot of them do not care about statues. Obviously, this was just a small group of young people. I'm not saying that they represent all young people, but it was really interesting from their point of view. The ones that live in Bow in particular would walk past this statue and it was nothing to them. It wasn't a thing really. They were like, oh yeah, that statue. Oh yeah, that's where I meet so-and-so, whatever. It didn't mean anything. And when we deep dived a little bit more, we had these luggage labels and we were like, okay, so one of the provocations, what could we replace Gladstone with or statues? Some of the young people were like, I don't care for statues. What do they mean? What do they represent? They're mainly just old dead white people and they don't mean anything to me. We had some that was like, I put myself on my Snapchat because that's interesting. We had someone say, my God. We had someone says that, what about representation of people that are lonely, that are not seen? unsung heroes of a community. And then we were speaking about, can one person or one thing represent a whole community? You know, so we got into that. We were asking them, okay, if there was a statue, what would it look like? A lot of people were saying their mothers, and it would be purple. It would be a purple wrapped, you know, sari, which was really beautiful. There was a few people, especially young women there actually, that were very politically savvy, and they were like, basically like ban all the statues, not interested at all. And there was one question, there was one answer around, I feel that people of colour, this is their words, are extremely underrepresented, particularly in Western Europe. Though I am aware that there are a lot more well-known people of colour, but there are not enough representation on statues. And this is with a UK lens. Some people are talking about COVID and how obviously impactful that was in the world. What are we doing to represent COVID? So essentially, these 14-year-olds, their stance on statues and what they mean is nothing. Is a stone thing that they might see on the bus, you know, or they walk past, or it's a meeting place. It didn't really have any cultural or any relevance to them. And when we unpacked Gladstone's bag, what they were, you know, this is like a lot about his life. And the one thing that they were interested in was his horoscope. And then we did another group with mums who were mainly from, I can't remember, mainly Bengali heritage. And they were actually interested in more personal aspects of his life. And there's a part of Gladstone's life where he lost his child, he lost a daughter, I think. And so they picked up the teddy bear. That was important to them, where the young people said there was something that represents him being was it a Sagittarius or a Capricorn or whatever. That was more important. It's just interesting, right? As I said, this is just a small group of young people. But to me, it just gave greater context in the larger debate and conversation around statues. And I always have to bat for young people because they're never in the conversations that they need to be. You know, if we're thinking about young people are the future or whatever, they're not in these conversations. So I think it's always interesting to get that perspective from the younger generation. So while we're debating it as adults and while it's in the news and while people want to topple them, I'm always interested to hear, okay, well, what about the young people that in 10 years time, you know, what would that look like for them? And a few, we had some, I know Finn, you're going to talk about this, but we had some writers, including myself, that wrote responses from these community groups. And what I wrote about was representing these young people, actually. And it was like, not interested in statues, because some of them were talking about art, actually. Because while we can't represent, while they were saying that we can't represent a community or a group of people, or even a time in history, how can we represent something in different ways? So hopefully you'll get a chance to listen to some of the audio pieces. And the one that I wrote was like, actually completely abolish these statues. And is it a QR code that you can put anywhere and discover the good, the bad, the ugly about that place or that space or that field or that building or that bus stop or wherever it is? Yeah, that's me. I'll pass back to Finn.
I wanted to say a bit more about the William Gladstone statue in particular, for those who don't know. In fact, if you, is someone online there? If you go to newhistories.org, in fact, it's open now, everyone can look at newhistories.org, which takes you to the page on the Applied Stories website, which explains a bit more about it. But there's also a picture of William Gladstone. And one of the reasons we chose him, partly he's in East London where I work a lot and it's hugely diverse, and I thought it was interesting that there was this old Victorian politician there. He's pictured with his right hand outstretched like that, and it's painted red. And that red paint was not there in the original design. And the reason that it's there today is because there's a local legend that has sprung up around the statue. If you look at the base of it, it says "A Gift to the East End" by Theodore Bryant. Can we keep... Oh, I was going to show some pictures. Oh, okay. And there is a local myth that William Bryant, of course, was the owner of the Bryant and May Match Factory, which was around the corner in Bow and employed mostly immigrant Irish women and girls in appalling conditions. And it is said that he paid for the statue of Gladstone out of gratitude at the end of Gladstone's life, that he never regulated the factory or imposed a tax on matches, both of which were discussed. And moreover, in doing so, he imposed a temporary tax on all his workers to pay for this statue. And they were so incensed that they cut themselves. They went to the unveiling of the statue, they cut themselves and threw their own blood at it. Now, as a professional storyteller, that feels like it's had a polish to me in terms of stories, or at least gained something over the years in its retelling. But this legend lives on, because whenever anyone tries to scrub off the red paint on Gladstone's right hand, which Tower Hamlets Council did do, particularly in the run-up to the 2012 Olympics, it always, overnight, gets repainted. So this statue itself has become a site of its own small act of resistance. I'm not sure there's any, I didn't come across any historical evidence for the actual story, which is why I call it a myth. But in a way, that doesn't matter. It's become the truth now, as all stories that are retold enough do. So I really loved going on Mancy's British Empire walking tour, which I would definitely recommend, by the way. I was doing my R&D and loved it so much, I said, please will you come and work with me on this? Because it does exactly that. She talks about how the act of putting up a statue, its physical presence in different time periods, takes on just as much of its own identity and, you know, politics as the original figure themselves. And that was really fascinating to unpack. Because what we were trying to do here was not do a one-off with William Gladstone to test something out. I wanted to design a process which we could replicate with any statue. And this idea of a 2-hour community workshop into which you can kind of swap in or swap out different figures means you could do it anywhere around the country or even the world. Briefly, about audio drama and where this is kind of going, my ambitions for this. I've written as much for radio as theatre in my career, and in a way I love it more because you can do more. Audio naturally lends itself to flights of fancy. It's very easy to go back in the past or forward in the future. You can travel in and out of characters' heads, down phone lines and pop up in other countries. It's the most extraordinarily fluid medium, and because you don't have to mock anything up visually, it all costs the same. It's just sound effects and editing time and good writing. So it kind of, the idea of, these are some pictures from our launch event last weekend and throughout of the workshop process. Eventually, I would like to raise enough money to build an audio bench, which would sit permanently in the same space as the statue. You get them sometimes in museums, particularly in outdoor areas. They're weatherproof, big solid wooden things with speakers in the sides. They're solar powered these days, and a push panel button where you can select one of, I think, 6, 10, 15-minute pieces. There you are, Mancy, giving it large. So it neatly kind of sidesteps and tries to kind of take some of the poison out of the statues debate by saying, well, we're not going to touch the statue, actually, and this project doesn't make any recommendations for or against it staying or going. All it seeks to do is open up a new space within the same space, within a space that's dominated by one figure, open up a new channel for more contemporary and more diverse voices, and that has a similar permanence. So at the moment it lives in the cloud. You can go and experience it. In fact, we'll be doing a listening party at the foot of the statue in September. We did one last weekend, but we've got another piece in development which will be ready in September, so we'll share 4 rather than 3 pieces next time around. In the meantime, they're on my website, newhistories.org. I thought it would be fun to listen to a couple of them. They're only short, sort of 4 to 7 minutes each. Unless I've missed anything, which anyone would like to add? No? All right. If you scroll up to the top of that page, that's it, A Gift to the East End. Shall we hear Gladstone himself, and then we'll hear TT's piece? Thank you. It might need turning up. It's best on headphones, of course, as a sound designer. But
Ah, how thrilled I am to make a new acquaintance. A century and a half gone in a blink. I'm Queen Victoria's favorite Prime Minister. Not that one would know it in this stink. I stand before you choking on this highway as Theodore Bryant's gift to the East End. That's all of you, so don't be looking sideways. Look up. Behold, a long-forgotten friend. William Ewart Gladstone, High Tory. That's like the ones today without the filth. I served Her Majesty 4 times with glory, and 4 more as Chancellor in between ill health. I represented Oxford in my youth. An MP at 23, I started young. I went to Oxford along, of course, with Eton. A place I learned to hold my merchant's tongue. Free trade, a level playing field for all. My mantra earned my name, the People's William. 'Twas trade which kept my father's heart in thrall. But please don't ask just how he earned his millions. I was first to ask why Britain was in Ireland. What business have we in that cursed bog? But Home Rule had to wait a generation while Parliament's attack dogs did their job. Responsibility and vision were my values. Spend not beyond what Britain can afford. Lower taxes, or even better, scrap them. Let market forces fill the mouths of braying hordes. And yet, this scarlet stain remains undimmed. A foolish act of vengeance, yes, but whose? Nothing more than socialism's posturing. Repeat a lie, it soon becomes the truth. They say the Irish match girls from the factory cut themselves in protest at some tax. But ask thee this, what quarrel have the Irish with a man who tried to hand their country back? I was a man of faith, oh, I saved souls. At night I'd preach God's word to fallen women. If impure thoughts should rankle like hot coals, a riding crop would soon restore my vigor. So now I stand, stained black with city soot. Yet once I strive to build an earthly heaven. I wrought our special land a lasting good, and in return, they built the A11. All day your metal wagons roar on by, and not a single one casts up their eye. I beg you, please, I have nothing to hide. Unpack my bag before you all decide.
I wrote originally for a live actor to perform in the each workshop, which he did, obviously minus the sound effects. We've polished it up into a piece for audio listening there. And what it tries to do is kind of, I mean, I read a bio of Gladstone that's like that. I mean, he lived into his 90s, he was Prime Minister 4 times and Chancellor another 4, like lots of stuff happened. And there was an awful lot to his life. So the challenge really was like, how do you distill that into something for, like literally not a single one of them had heard of him in either the parents group or the young people's session, or actually the public one was different because there were some academics there. But in general, mostly the people who you most associate with Bow and its communities didn't have a clue who he was. And so you need to sort of explain that, but without kind of spending too much time on it, because the whole point of the workshop wasn't to teach them about Gladstone, it was to give them an understanding of that figure and the story behind that figure in order for them to then make their own creative responses. So the first hour of the workshop was Gladstone, and they were invited to take, this bag was full, and they were invited to take an object out of the bag at random, hand it to Gladstone. These luggage labels are written in the first person. And so the actor playing him would read that out in Gladstone's voice, and it would each tell you something. And then they were asked to arrange these in order of importance, in order of what matters to them most. So is it the fact that his father was in the slave trade, for example? Was it his religion? Was it his monetary policy or his policy about war? Was it the fact that he had a child who died or he went to Eton? All of these things sort of were intended to use three-dimensional theatrical techniques to open up the past. And then the second half, and most important actually, part of the workshop, was an open creative session. We had a lot of craft-based materials. Mansi and one of our other writers, Sharmila, put us onto this, where the participants were invited to make their own contribution back into the now empty Gladstone bag with what they would like commemorated. And we had craft materials for them to fashion things out of plasticine or paper or card. They could write something, they could speak. I had my microphone there. We had some really interesting responses, some of which Titi's talked about. And then the writer in the room, of which Titi was one in the Young People's Workshop, is circulating and gathers all that up and has the challenge of writing a short piece in response. I very rarely work with professional actors, at least these days, through Applied Stories. I'm very interested in non-professional actors and local voices and accents and celebrating that as part of the fabric and colour of the piece. So this piece that you're about to hear, it's the one, not the second one, but the third one, called Imagine. It's performed by two teenagers from the college where we did the workshop, and scripted by Titi.
Hello and welcome. Ellis here.
I'm Mira. Let's start this by asking you all a question. Where are you right now?
Standing, Rabbi Gladstone, the man himself.
Or sitting on one of the benches? Or by the church steps?
Your neck arched or tilted as you listen to us. Get comfortable because we're taking you on a short audio experience. Amira, it's your line. You say Gladstone was born in...
Ellis.
Yeah?
I'm not really here for Gladstone, you know?
No?
No.
I thought we were going to talk about him and who he was, educate the listeners about his life, no?
No. I'm going to set another tone. Give you and the listeners the deal on what I think about these statues.
Please tell us what you mean.
I just think we can imagine someone else standing on this plinth. That makes us think, has meaning.
Something that has meaning. To who? To us?
Yep.
Like who? You?
Yeah, me and you and young people in Bow. All London, you know? Because I don't think Gladstone's a symbol of now.
To some, maybe.
Really? What? How? I know if we ask the members of this church here, or stop anyone along this road, this part of London, no one will have much to say about him, because no one really cares.
Wow. Massive assumption there. You don't know people's connections to the past. Reflections on who he was?
But how long should him being here last? We could replace him easily.
With what?
What about some, I don't know, representation of our ancestors?
What is that? Some ancient cross?
Okay, what about a symbol of our generation?
And that is a giant TikTok logo?
Maybe.
Or a singer?
Singer. I like Lizzo, so sure.
Influencers. People that contribute to popular culture.
Influencers? Nah, I'm not so sure.
Or another celeb.
Maybe. Or what about some way to mark the many faces that represent our communities instead?
Like honoring the many nurses, street cleaners, road sweepers, teachers?
Yeah, great idea, right? And it's relevant to now. A mixture of generations represented.
But these people, celebrities, even people from the community are still people that are not perfect. Why are they worth it and not Gladstone?
Because they're less problematic.
Says who? Anyone who's a person comes with problems.
But they are relevant.
Until they're not, well, whoever it is, they'll still be studied for school trips that eventually become a meeting spot or a pause for someone when they need to take him home because it's too hot.
No, these new statues on new plinths would be more real, like Rampton, Ankara, headscarves, saris, kenti, bhakti.
Ooh, or Gandhara. Kamises entwined like a new flag we've created.
Yeah, a mashup of cultures worn with jeans and Nike blazers.
Hands in pan, Mendy, Gucci belts, Fenty.
Right, you're getting it.
It'll be like,
I mean, why not? So many of these great men.
And women.
Yeah, but mostly men. I look at it and I can't see myself in them. And many different cultures and nations have been a part of this so-called great nation. I've hated that they've been immortalized, and for so long, so many people didn't even realize that these men,
And women.
yeah, but mostly men, have been worshipped from their ivory towers. Take this one, Gladstone. It's like he's forever sitting upon some throne.
Throne?
Symbolically, I mean.
But someone in the past thought necessary for us in the future, right now, to see him, study him, and place him upon this plinth and bow.
But what do we know? Why is this man deserved for this spot, here amongst old gravestones that time forgot?
But whether we remove him or not, history can't be erased.
But so much of history, our history, has been erased. And these statues haven't stood the test of time. They've aged.
All right. You're making good points, so how about this?
What?
Let's imagine something else for a minute. Thinking about the future, but a little bit different.
Okay, I'm listening.
What if
Yeah, what if?
there were no statues? Statues became obsolete. We don't have anyone on plinths and pedestals.
Then what would we have instead?
Well, you talk of us as a generation. Think of all the things that represents.
That's broad, as that is deep. That could be anything, like we're becoming less afraid to use our voices. We're making radically bold choices.
Yeah.
We talk about mental health, practice having boundaries, and better sleep.
Yep. And what else?
Oh, you're making me do all the work. Okay, we're dismantling systems that have been oppressive. We're reconstructing and re-examining hierarchies and patriarchies. And well, there's technology. That's ever evolving. How we communicate, how we tell stories, solving how we can be anywhere in the world and still connect with each other.
So let's capture that.
Yeah?
Yes, statues aren't just there to represent history. For many people, they also represent power and authority. So let's take that all the way.
You're right.
Right?
Because the problem with statues is who gets to decide who should be memorialized. When there are so many people deserving of that honor, that have served a community, fought a war, brought about justice.
Exactly.
So what could we replace them with?
It's not just about replacing, just having something new, something different.
I like the idea of stories and history and it being alive and all around us.
What do you mean?
Like we could have some app or something and scan it on anything. A tree, a building, a field, a street, a school.
And you can find out about them all. What history was there? What has now gone? What has been replaced or rebuilt?
Yeah, and just like Wikipedia, mixed with a bit of social media.
Mixed in with Siri and a bit of Alexa next to words, text, sounds, or even smells.
Capturing a moment right where you are, and we can include people that no one knows about.
No doubt. We'll discover something we never knew, and more interesting things that we care about.
Imagine, you could be sitting in a park, looking all around you, and information is floating in the air.
Yeah, or you're on the number 8 bus, people watching amongst the morning rush, and you look out the window and discover
that on that corner over there was where the match girls walked home from work, and where my mum, as a girl, walked home from church.
And where you and me meet now to walk and just talk a bit.
We're coming to an end.
Thank you for listening to us.
I'll ask you what I asked you at the beginning. Where are you right now?
In the same spot, standing, sitting.
On one of the benches, or by the church steps.
Your neck arched or tilted as you listen to us.
Discuss that with history, we should be able to have our say with it.
Find different ways to play with it, engage with it.
Connecting the past with the present, with what's to come.
History shouldn't be passive or static, we should be embracing it.
It's not just in the spot where you're standing, or by the bench when you're sitting.
Look up, but also look everywhere.
It's where you'll find history, 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 history.
It's hard for one writer to kind of continue to kind of absorb everything, all the discussions that are going on in the room, because there was like small group breakout bits and so on. And you guys were brilliant at kind of taking sections of the group and being able to kind of nurture and share that conversation a little bit and then feed it back to the writers.
This was my first workshop beyond the confines of institution. So, well, the first thing that was an eye-opener in that sense is that not everyone cares. Like, here we know that if we talk about if you raise a controversial topic, everyone will have an opinion. It need not even be controversial. You can just say you want tea and there will be a debate for 2 hours on tea, right? Or whether you can have tea, whether you cannot have tea, whether it's a privilege to have tea or not. There can be a debate on everything, but outside the confines of the institution, not everyone has an opinion. Not everyone wants to have an opinion. That in itself is, I don't want to use the word privilege, but to have an opinion on matters is in itself a form of privilege that some of us do enjoy and some do not have taken the time to think about it. So that was one of the main points, at least with the first group that we came up with. That was the student groups of quite young students. And they did not, first of all, they did not know about Gladstone, but that's fine, I did not know about him either before I got to know about the project. So, but it's not just that. They were okay with a few things that I knew would have created controversies. So, there were portions where we get to know that his father was involved in slave trade. And even Gladstone himself talks about the slave trade, but it did not seem to irk people as much as irked some people as much as it irked others. There was a writing crop which I found so interesting. But as I guess Titi said or Mansi said, that the Sagittarius seems to have much more importance. So that was an interesting way to look at how the people think beyond the confines of academia, to encounter topics that matters and to address them and to make them care about it or not to care about it, but beyond the confines of academia. And I thought that was a very enriching experience.
Thank you, Shafak. I thought that was really interesting. I think you're right about the not having an opinion, but I think that that's often to do with having had the time to form one or to engage with the subject in question. And that was something else that this project sort of did by default, was it actually spent 2 hours going, right, we're going to sit and talk about this. But we're going to do it in a really fun, creative way, you know. So I was pleased to be able to provide that. And now there's a whole bunch of people in Bow who know about Gladstone, who didn't before. Anyway, thank you for all your work on it. You guys were great. We're on for about another 10 minutes. Titi, Mansi, and Eleanor, do you want to come on stage and we'll see what kind of questions come up?
Thank you. I found this discussion very relevant because I'm writing about statue for my dissertation. And my question is, for instance, this statue of Gladstone, it may not be that controversial, but think of statues like the statue against fascism and war, which is in Vienna, or statues in Rwanda, in the museum, that are placed to remember the genocide, that have an implication on the relationship of groups and ethnic groups or religious groups in the present day. That statues, when they are very debatable, how do you deal with them? You suggested like placing a QR in order to narrate different stories, but to demolish them is as if it is attacking a very sacred thing for the victims. To let it stay there is, for instance, when these statues are very realistic statues, is to instigate conflict. How do you deal with that?
I personally am not for statues of any kind. That's just my opinion. I'm not a historian or an academic. I feel like some statues are almost like the acts of violence when they're in communities that what the statues represents were, oppressing that people. So I personally, I don't have like loads of history about some of them. This is just me as a black woman in the UK, Nigerian, Yoruba. I know we spoke, I was listening to the talk before, and I find that quite interesting actually about caste. But so for me and how I identify and how I see the world, what I do in the world, what's around me, I'm not for them. And I think there's other ways that we can talk about history. And I don't believe in erasing history. It's not that. Although we know a lot of histories, especially in schools, because I'm coming from such a different point of view. Do you know what I mean? I'm coming from working in the educational system. I'm coming from being a mother myself. I'm coming from being born in Nigeria, coming over to the UK. So that's what I'm about. And so for me, just for that fact, I'm not about them. So the statue that was in Bristol that got torn down, I cheered. I was like, absolutely. I'm not for them at all. No human is perfect. They shouldn't be seen as that, right? Even if they've done good, So I don't particularly see any value to them. And I think especially the ones that, as I said, are embedded in a community, where that community, it just doesn't make sense to me, just on that type of level, without even going deep and thinking about history. But it'd be interesting, actually, Mansi, what you think, because you do know more about them than I do from a different point of view.
The Bristol statue is a perfect example because it's almost like is the thing that changed everything in terms of legislation in the UK. And if you look at statues even as works of art, they have this power to inspire feeling. And in some cases, they inspire very, very strong feelings of pain when someone passes them. And like I said, when I introduced the project, it was these statues kind of have a life of their own. They've lived longer than the person they represent, and they mean different things. And their history also starts adding on layers. So I don't know if, I'm going to say the history for people who don't know, but the Colston statue, that moment it was rolled off that pier and thrown into the water, was a moment that Bristolians will be forever proud of, because it was everyone coming together. I'm speaking very generally. I'm sure some people hated that moment, but a lot of people, it was a very powerful moment. It was fished out of the water, and the spray paint was left intact, and now it's on display at M-Shed, which is the museum over there. And instead of placing it on a plinth, they've placed it horizontal, like he's lying on the ground. So whoever's looking at him, the audience now has power over the statue. So built environment has, the way it's constructed can construct our relationship to these characters in space that are represented by statues. So now when people look at that statue, firstly, they are not confronted by the statue. They don't have to pass it. They have to make the choice to go and see it. So that is a very important distinction in terms of interacting with difficult or histories, which we take for granted when we deal with, like, a movie has PG ratings and adult ratings because you want to be forewarned about what you're going to confront. So this is a great example of kind of buying into that, okay, I've prepared myself, I'm going to go and see the statue, and I'm going to take care of my feelings. And so you walk into this M-Shed. Then secondly, they've given the audience power over the statue because the statue is not standing above you anymore. You're looking down at it. And thirdly, they haven't removed the graffiti. So the layer of history is now added onto that particular statue. Now, this statue is really important because it does reflect feelings like what Titi expressed, you know, of pain and anger. But and for anyone who's interested in law over here, it also provoked the Retain and Explain bill, which basically makes it impossible to remove a statue now. So it was a very powerful movement, but depending, because there's so much politics involved with statues, and statues can cost as much as a house in London. I don't know if anyone knows that. And so someone's shelling out big money for this, you know. So it's not a low-cost investment. So if you want to move it, a lot of people are going to have something to say about it. So it's very layered, for sure.
Can I just jump in on this, sorry, as the academic in the project, which, you know, I said there's lots of learning on all sides. I definitely had to do a lot of learning. I wanted a thesis and I wanted an argument and I wanted us to have a position on this. And actually in all the meetings that we had around this, I was the cantankerous one. I was like, no, 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 but what about this? What about this? And people would respond and we'd have this conversation and it would move on. I'd be like, but what about the argument? What have we decided? And that wasn't it. Like working with creatives, that wasn't what they were interested in. And I think just sort of two things in response. One is that I think this project emerged in a UK moment, UK artists in response. And it is about statues of people. We talked about that a lot. Some of the people, what a lot of the community participants talked about was essentially building public art as memorial. And we had conversations about where's the boundary between a statue and art. And again, we didn't come up with a thesis, but what we did was we talked. And I think, you know, we've talked you through the workshop, we've showcased the plays, the audio dramas, but actually the workshops themselves were the project, the conversations that people had in that space. And I think we'll take away from that space. And I think as the project develops, producing some resources that can continue the conversation in the workshop. The audio dramas are doing that, but maybe a few other things. That, I think, that gave me my thesis. That's what I said, okay, that makes me happy. That's what we're doing. We're not telling people to think one thing or the other. We're not teaching people history. I had to let go of that. I really struggled with that. But what we're doing is we're setting up spaces for people to try things out. So people organize the objects in the order of importance, and then we ask people to rearrange them. So you could try things out. You could get a response. There was hesitancy, but actually it produced a community in the room in that moment that was doing something different to the kinds of communities and silencing that statue was doing outside. So, I mean, that's what I thought our thesis ended up as. So it's a process rather than an answer to the question of statues.
Thank you, that sums it up really nicely. I just wanted to speak briefly about the point about Gladstone being relatively uncontroversial. You're right, as statues go. And that was to some extent deliberate in that in a pilot like this, the most important thing was designing the process and keeping everyone safe, and we didn't want to choose a really, incendiary statue for the first one. but our ambition is to do more controversial ones. But you're right that it probably couldn't be done everywhere. Like if you're talking about the Rwandan context, that a process like this, however lovely and creative it is, you know, would not probably be enough. It wouldn't be. It would probably do more harm than good. And that the whole thing would need to be redesigned if indeed it was the right process at all for that context. So this is very much about British statues because they're everywhere and because there's so many of them from our colonial period which we're sort of somehow forbidden from talking about too much in public discourse, and certainly at government level there's active moves to discourage debate on it. So it's a way of artists coming together to say, well, in the absence of leadership on this debate, at the political level, it falls to culture makers to do it. And the reason we didn't come up with a thesis is because we weren't making a thesis, we were making new public art. We've made 4 new pieces of new public art to sit along Gladstone. And we've sort of along the way invented a new genre of public art in the audio statue. So, yeah, there we go. Anyway, go ahead.
Just one more thing about the statues. Statues are 3D, but I think with the actor in the space, they literally made them 4D. So there was this temporal element added to it. And with the kids especially, I mean, willing suspension of disbelief, they spoke to the actor like he was Gladstone. So they were like, when they gave him, say, something they made in the craft session and said, oh, we want to put our mobile phone on the plinth, they actually explained the technology to the actor, saying that, oh, we know that maybe you don't know what this is. So it added this 4th layer. And what the objects did was that it brought out themes. And that was, I think, very important because then we understood what theme resonated with the community. And Shafak actually did a very clever thing during the group with the mothers. She moved when she took the toy that represented the loss of a child and put it right at the end and said it didn't matter. So when it came to reshuffling, this group of mothers that was actually quite shy immediately got up and moved it right to the front, you know. So it was this really interesting way of interacting with different groups who have different levels of confidence or different levels of engagement, and just give everyone a medium to express themselves.
So first, I'm not from the UK, so forgive me for any forgive my ignorance on not understanding the situations with the statues here. This kind of ties into I'm between urban planning and psychology. I do a lot of work with social representations, and it's kind of this is kind of relevant in my research topic. In terms of actually people having spaces and stuff happening organically. And I was just wondering how you guys feel about that. For instance, history is history. Stuff happens. People, of course, want to commemorate things, which is the reason why we have a lot of statues. My thing is when people are organically able to occupy a space or a space becomes a part of a collective, the statues there are often things that'll happen that could, first is statues. I'm thinking about it from the standpoint, like in the US, it could be statues, street names, schools. There are a lot of stuff that like represent different things that are supposed to commemorate a memory of something from the past. A lot of times people will occupy a space and they will change those things or modify those things. For instance, when I was little, there was a street named after a Confederate general, and we just took the signs down so much that it's like me and some of my friends as kids just took the signs down so much the city just finally changed the name because they got tired of the signs being taken away and the police not being able to find where they're going. Or there is an Indian community in a suburban neighborhood outside of my city that originally was a white community that the park was named Thomas Jefferson, and after it became an Indian community, they didn't necessarily have the park changed through city ordinance or anything. They just got the funding, put a statue of Gandhi and renamed it Gandhi Park. So anytime they send out flyers or anything, they'll put Gandhi Park instead of Thomas Jefferson Park, which is probably going to be an issue in the coming decades because more white people are moving back into the city and they are putting Jefferson Park on everything it's kind of an interesting thing that I know is going to boil into a debate that I'm looking forward to seeing. But yeah, my question is pretty much like from the perspective of something happening organically or not even influencing people, just people having space and also trying to understand like how people occupy different spaces here in the UK to even vocalize or try and change what is the statues or anything in that space. Forgive me if that was long-winded or didn't make sense.
I don't know if is a question. I mean, it's a bit of a question, really. First of all, I just say that I've loved this. This is amazing, really, really interesting. I was on Monday at the launch of the our party parliamentary group, organized by an academic here at SOAS, and we're talking about the public order bill and how it stops people from protesting. And it seems to me that, you know, being unable to take a statue down and putting it somewhere else and take it from a plinth and put it on the floor is, again, prohibiting us from expressing our opinion and saying, we don't want this in our community, we want something else. And so the opportunity for political engagement that this project seems to have embedded in it, you know, the awareness of that you can subvert things by putting paint, red paint, or change the name of a park, you know, and that you can have citizens' action and that you can engage people politically, because it's so often that people don't think about stuff. They don't think they're empowered enough to act. And perhaps, and I think my question is, you know, did you see opportunities for political engagement coming out of this time for reflection and for really thinking about, well, who is this statue? What is it doing here? What does it represent? You know, what does it mean to me in my community?
Yeah, I think with the young people we did, and also to the point of the gentleman at the back, the American gentleman, around. I'm interested in those kind of conversations where the community that the statue or the monument or whatever it is in, and how they're interacting with it. I think that's more interesting than a bunch of people who aren't a part of that community are deciding something. You know, it's this is happening all around the world, isn't it? Other people get to decide, you know, on behalf of people. I think that's more interesting. I think that's a more interesting kind of conversation, debate around how communities can have control. I use that term loosely, you know, or have a stance or a perspective of something that's in their community. That seems interesting. Then you know, the statues are going to stay there. Oh well, tough. It feels like it feels that there isn't any agency, there isn't any discourse. It's just, this is what we're doing and this is what we've decided to do. I think it's very interesting that a community has come together and just decided, I'm going to rename, because this is what it serves. I think that's hilarious, and I'm all for that, actually. If we have to have stuff, it's like, actually, this doesn't serve us. And the young people that was what they were interested in. The young people were interested in. Yeah, as I said, some were like, I'm not interested in statues, full stop, because I don't see the point. And the ones that did were like, well, yeah, they need to be more relevant to us. Like, if otherwise they are just going to be things that we walk past, which Gladstone was, and so many different examples. And I think taking another statue, would be very interesting to take a more controversial statue. Like we were talking about, oh my God, there's so many, isn't there? And what would that conversation be about? Because, yeah, like Amansi was saying, when we were talking about some of the history of Gladstone and how his father was involved in the slave trade, they weren't that interested. Really, so it was more, you know. And I don't know if it's their age or if it's, I don't know, lots of different reasons. So I think it's a better discourse around what a community can do. Like with the Gandhi with the statue in America, or what you're saying. I think that's more that it holds for more interesting conversation.
Let's take some more questions.
Okay, I don't know if you're the right people to ask this question, but I'll ask you first and explain why I'm asking. Are there artists or creative groups who are working, because all the conversation I've heard, or most of the conversation I've heard since the toppling of the statues, since Black Lives Matter, has been anti-statues, even when the artists don't overtly present that as their, you know, but it comes out somehow that you're. So are there groups that are working to kind of let people know that maybe the statues are not too much of a bad idea? For example, I've heard, whether we like it or not, there is a reason why Nigerians, Indians, Ethiopians are rushing to the United Kingdom. it is obviously a great country in some way. It may not be the best place on earth. It may have its historical issues. But Titi, you're here. You're not in Nigeria. I mean, I'm not saying, no. I mean, there are lots of people going across the desert and all that, fleeing to these countries. This is not America where, everybody in America is, an immigrant. The UK has history that goes back. So are there groups that are letting people realize these are the men, as flawed as they are, who built this country that you are all rushing to? Remember that, well, I have to point out, I'm born, bred, studied everything in Nigeria, live mostly in Nigeria. So my attitude towards these things is less emotional and more rational. I understand when you're black and living this part of the world, all the resentment that builds up from your experiences. I don't have that. So I'm able to look more rationally. And I think, people are saying so-called great country, or who are these people? How would I feel if the Europeans moved into Nigeria someday, took over a territory, and then renamed it somebody else? We need to, no, I mean now, today. So we don't want to commit the sins that people did again. So we have changed our name. A lot of streets are being changed and some are not. But how would I feel if today, remember we're talking about today, there are many historical sins, crimes. But how would I feel if Europeans came into a place and then renamed it? How do we think this affects attitude towards immigration? The United Kingdom, well, I know there are lots of immigrants in government, can decide we don't want somebody from it. I know it can't happen today. I know it can't. I'm just, giving a wild case. What if they decide, we don't want somebody from Nigeria anymore in this country? They could close their doors. I know they cannot. I'm just giving an exaggerated, But my point is, are there groups saying, let's look at it this way? Because I hear so much of this anti-statue, these are, but these are the men and women who built this country that most people are rushing to. Yeah, but these are some of the people. Remember, we're talking about a country that goes back centuries, not the past 90 years of colonialism.
While I agree with what lady was trying to say, my question is more deeper than this. That since when did this particular campaign took its rise and originated from? While I was listening to you guys, Finn and Titi and Manasi and all of you, naturally it happens, I was trying to kind of correlate it with India. And being an Indian, who else could know better than me the politics of the statue and how politics can play a critical, crucial, devastating role in the lives of people, whatever old they are and whatever intention there might have been for raising them. Statues are raised by the people, those are the beneficiaries. The parties, those are beneficiaries of them, the great men, then their statues are made. And then that particular politics. So my question to all of you is that while designing this project, did you take into consideration that particular political dimension or the politics of the statue? Is this particular thing, the project you are going to initiate, is it just merely initiating the dialogue regarding the white and black side of that person whose statue has been erected? Or is in future this particular statue is going to play in the hands of the politicians like Nigel Farage and right-wing and populist leaders, and instigating the sentiment of the youth, British youth, those who are still in some way colonial hangover, and they think that they are their ancestors and they built this nation. Although this lady is in kind of she's resisting and she's every right to say that she's not a part of the people, the values the statue represent. But still, we need to take into consideration that where exactly this anti-statue movement is going to feed into, where this anti-statue movement is feed into. While I thank you for initiating this dialogue and creating the new history or the layers of the history, but then this thing you should take into consideration from the Indian context as well.
Thank you.
If we just respond very quickly, we take a few minutes because we've got the next panel coming through. I think that this is exactly what we were trying to do. We were not going for a yes or no. We were asking people to have conversations. In terms of the current moment, Colston is this kind of the taking down of the Colston statue is seen as being this pivotal moment. There are decades of campaigning to get that statue taken down. Actually, what happened at the end was an act in which people there'd been lots of kind of democratic process that hadn't been seen through. There were votes on one side that was rejected by others. And so that act has a history in itself. I think that history of the politics of statues has a very long history here too. I mean, having gone into the discussion wanting a thesis, actually what the project produced was a way of trying to have conversations, open space up, create safer spaces for people to share different kinds of views. And we've shared one of the audio dramas with you. There's going to be 2 others. So to create that kind of layered space, actually you're going to have different voices on the same statue. Different groups of people will have their different takes. Some focuses on the emphasis on kind of parenthood. Some focuses more on other things that came up within the community groups. But the idea is directly not to say yes or no, but to say, let us talk together. Because the one thing that this culture war doesn't do is create space for different sides to come together and talk. And that's what I mean about kind of making the workshop the central hub of the project. Do you want to say a closing word, Finn, and then we need to move to the next?
Yeah, I mean, only that this could run and run, of course. On the point about our groups sort of springing up around this, I don't think there's anything particularly centralised. There's particular cases that hit the news, like Rhodes Must Fall, for example, or the debate that's taking place at the former Jeffrey Museum, now Museum of the Home, about his statue. So they seem to be quite discreetly around those. There is a website which is super useful because it's a geolocated pins on a map of the UK with all the UK statues of controversy. It's rather unsubtly toppleTheRacists.org, but it's very useful for seeing where the statues are. And there are information boxes on those statues, and so it's and I think after Black Lives Matter had a quite successful run of fundraising over here, that was one of the projects they donated some money to. But I don't know if there's anywhere in academia looking at statues, but I'm not aware of anywhere or any sort of centralised, coordinated effort, which is all the more reason for us to kind of step in, I think. On the thing about statues and kind of respecting them or honouring them or whatever, again, yeah, we're not taking a position. I come to this as an artist. I don't like statues, but for different reasons to TT. I don't like them because I think they're bad art. I think if you want to commemorate someone, commissioning a literal depiction of them is deeply unimaginative. And there are much better ways of going about that. So as an artist, I want to look past these old dead pieces of art and make new, better contemporary pieces of art out of them, and use digital technologies in particular to do that, which I think also usefully brings this whole debate into a non-physical sphere. I mean, the debate about the meaning of the narrative of space and the physical dominance or otherwise of space is super important, but we're able to sidestep that now by having a space which is the cloud, where we can actually house a plurality of voices, and that's what I'm interested in, I suppose.
So do listen to them on the cloud. They are available now.
They're only up for a few more days. Then I'm going to take them down because I want some people to come to the listening party in September. So Tuesday, 20th of September, 7 p.m. On newhistories.org. If you're quick, you can listen to the ones that are up there now. But at the bottom, there's a link to Eventbrite, so you can register for 20th September and come along, because they are best experienced in situ, of course.
But thank you very much. It's time to wrap up this panel. Thank you so much for joining us.